When 10-year-old Lily Carter ends up in the hospital after a brutal attack on her charity flower stand, no one in the sleepy town of Pinewood Creek suspects that this incident will trigger a chain of events that will change everything. Commander Jack Carter returns from a classified military mission and faces a disturbing reality. A town where fear has become law and a system that refuses to protect the innocent. Something in Jack's past, unknown even to his daughter, makes him the only person capable of confronting this threat. But that same past could cost him everything he has left. Behind the gleaming facade of the small Arizona town lies a dark network extending much further than anyone can imagine. And for Jack Carter, the real battle is only beginning. When all masks are torn away, only one question remains. How far is a father willing to go to protect what he loves most in the world? The spring sun beat down on Pinewood Creek's town square, turning the normally pleasant Arizona afternoon into something more oppressive. Lily Carter didn't seem to mind. The 10-year-old hummed softly as she arranged the freshly cut wildflowers on her small wooden stand. Her slender fingers, already calloused from gardening, moved with practiced precision. "These purple ones are called desert lupines," she explained to Mrs. Hoffman, who stopped by every Thursday. "They only bloom for a few weeks in the spring." "They're beautiful, dear," the elderly woman said, selecting a small bouquet. "Just like you." Lily smiled, revealing a gap where her front tooth had recently fallen out. As she wrapped the flowers in recycled paper, her eyes flickered to the worn photograph taped to her donation jar. A tall man in a Navy SEAL uniform stared back with the same sea-green eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. "How much longer until your daddy comes home?" Mrs. Hoffman asked, following her gaze. 6 days, 4 hours, and Lily glanced at her Hello Kitty watch, 22 minutes. What Lily couldn't know, was that Commander Jack Carter had already been cleared to return early. In less than 24 hours, he would be standing right where Mrs. Hoffman stood now, staring at the empty spot where his daughter's flower stand should be. The rumble of motorcycles cut through the afternoon quiet. 5, then 8 engines, growing louder as they approached the square. Conversations halted. Parents grabbed their children's hands. Shop owners moved toward their doors. The iron serpents had arrived. Lily felt her stomach tighten as the motorcycles circled her stand like sharks. She'd heard the whispers about what they did to Mr. Rodriguez's restaurant last month. How they'd threatened to burn down the library when the new librarian wouldn't pay their protection fee. Their leader, a hulking man with a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, killed his engine directly in front of her stand. Scarface Malone, people called him in whispers, never to his face. "Well, well," he said, removing mirrored sunglasses to reveal cold, empty eyes. "Isn't this the sweetest thing you've ever seen, boys?" Lily clutched the edge of her stand. Should she run? Would that make things worse? Scarface picked up a bunch of desert sage, examining it with exaggerated care. "How much?" $2, Lily stammered. "Or whatever you think is fair. It all goes to the Children's Cancer Center." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You hear that, boys? It's for charity." He dropped the flowers and ground them beneath his boot heel. "I think what's fair is that you understand something about this town." He leaned in close enough that Lily could smell stale cigarettes and whiskey on his breath. "Nothing happens in Pinewood Creek without our permission, and we didn't give permission for this." With a single sweep of his massive arm, he sent the entire display crashing to the ground. Glass shattered. Water spread across the concrete, carrying flower petals like tiny boats. "No!" Lily lunged forward to save her father's photograph as one of the bikers grabbed the donation jar. What happened next would be told differently depending on who was asked. Some would say she slipped. Others would insist she was pushed. All that mattered was the sickening crack as Lily's head hit the concrete edge of the fountain. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her father's photograph, trampled beneath motorcycle boots as the iron serpents roared away, laughing. No one in Pinewood Creek realized that their silent acquiescence had just set in motion events that would change their town forever. And 6,000 miles away, as Commander Jack Carter boarded a transport plane home, he had no idea that he was about to wage the most important battle of his life. The military transport touched down at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base under a brilliant Arizona sunset. Jack Carter felt the familiar rush, the mixture of relief and disorientation that came with returning stateside after deployment. Everything seemed simultaneously too quiet and too loud, too still and too chaotic. At 38, Jack had the lean, coiled physique of someone who maintained combat readiness as naturally as breathing. 16 years as a SEAL had etched permanent vigilance into his posture. Even standing in the casual disembarkation line, he unconsciously maintained awareness of exits, choke points, and potential threats. "Excited to see that little girl of yours, Commander?" asked Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had served under Jack for the past 3 operations. Jack's weathered face softened. "Can't wait. She's grown an inch and a half since I've been done." He patted the inside pocket of his uniform where he kept her latest school photo. "Been saving for a special father-daughter trip. Maybe the Grand Canyon." "She still doing that flower thing?" Jack nodded proudly. "Raised over $300 for the Children's Hospital last year." He checked his watch. "If I hurry, I might catch her before she closes up shop for the day." But Jack would never make it to the town square that evening. The drive to Pinewood Creek took just under 2 hours. As Jack's truck crested the hill overlooking the small town, streetlights were just beginning to flicker on. He rolled down the window, inhaling the familiar desert air, sage, dust, and that indefinable scent of home. Something felt off as he turned onto Sycamore Street. His neighbor, Martha Jenkins, was pacing on her front porch rather than settling in with her evening game shows. When she spotted his truck, she practically ran to the curb, hands twisting the dish towel she held. Jack's heart rate kicked up before his conscious mind processed why. 16 years of combat experience had taught him to recognize when something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Martha?" He was out of the truck before it fully stopped. "What's happened?" The older woman's face crumpled. "Oh, Jack. It's Lily. She's—" Jack's world narrowed to a pinpoint. Combat mode engaged instantly, adrenaline flooding his system. "Where is she?" His voice was deadly calm. "Memorial Hospital. They took her there about 3 hours ago." Martha's words tumbled out between sobs. "Those monsters, those iron serpents. They destroyed her flower stand. When she tried to save your picture, she hit her head on the fountain. She hasn't woken up yet." Something cold and terrible settled in Jack's chest. All the firefights, all the missions in hostile territory, all the close calls, nothing had prepared him for this hollow feeling. "Who's with her?" he asked, already moving back toward his truck. "Sarah Garcia from next door. I've been calling the hospital every half hour." Jack nodded once sharply. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Martha caught his arm. "Jack," she said lower now, "everyone saw what happened. Those bikers laughed. They took her donation money. And no one did anything. Not even Sheriff Davis." She hesitated before adding, "They're at the Rattlesnake Bar most nights, celebrating." Jack's expression revealed nothing, but something shifted behind his eyes. Anyone who knew him well would have recognized it, the same look he got before high-risk operations. "I need to see my daughter," he said simply. 20 minutes later, Jack stood motionless in the doorway of room 212. The steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell assaulted his senses. But all he saw was Lily, impossibly small in the adult-sized hospital bed, a white bandage stark against her dark hair. Sarah Garcia rose from the chair beside the bed, relief washing over her tired face. "She's stable," she whispered. "Doctor says the next 12 hours are critical, but they're hopeful." Jack moved to the bedside, taking Lily's small hand in his. Her fingers were still stained with dirt from her flower garden. "I'm here now, Lily Pad," he whispered. "Daddy's home." He had missed birthdays before. School plays. First days and last days. The nature of his job meant sacrificing parts of fatherhood most men took for granted. But he had always promised Lily one thing, that he would be there when it truly mattered. And nothing had ever mattered more than this moment. As Sarah quietly left the room, she didn't notice the duffel bag Jack had brought in and placed under the visitor's chair. Nor did she see him gently place Lily's hand back on the bed before unzipping the bag just enough to check its contents. What Jack Carter brought back from his deployments wasn't souvenirs. It was skills, training, and a very particular set of capabilities that Pinewood Creek was about to witness firsthand. Inside the hospital room, Jack settled into the chair for his vigil, knowing exactly what would happen when his daughter was stable. The iron serpents had no idea who they'd just provoked, or what was coming for them. Lily stabilized overnight. The critical hours between midnight and dawn passed with her vital signs slowly strengthening, each beep of the monitor a small victory in the silent battle being waged within her young body. Jack didn't leave her side, refusing the cot a sympathetic nurse had offered. Instead, he maintained his vigil from the uncomfortable vinyl chair positioned directly beside the bed, where he could reach out and touch her hand at any moment. Outside the window, the Arizona night gradually gave way to morning. First came the subtle shift from black to deep blue, then the faint golden glow on the eastern horizon that heralded another scorching desert day. Jack watched it all, marking time not by the clock on the wall, but by the incremental improvements in his daughter's condition. A stronger pulse, a more natural color returning to her cheeks, more regular breathing. By 7 a.m., Dr. Patel arrived, her white coat crisp despite the early hour, her manner calm and professional. She studied the night's readings carefully before examining Lily directly, her movements gentle yet precise. The CT scan shows minimal swelling, she explained, flipping through charts at the foot of Lily's bed. The doctor's fingers moved confidently across the tablet screen, bringing up brain imaging that Jack studied intently. We'll keep her sedated today, then gradually reduce medication tomorrow. With luck, she'll wake up naturally. Jack nodded, the dark circles under his eyes the only indication he hadn't slept. 16 years of special operations had taught him to function without rest when necessary, to push his body beyond normal limits. When can I take her home? Best case? 3 to 4 days for observation, Jar. Patel hesitated, her expression shifting subtly. Commander Carter, the police will want to speak with you. Sheriff Davis left his card. Jack's expression remained neutral, betraying none of the cold anger that flared at the mention of local law enforcement. The sheriff had been noticeably absent since Lily's admission to the hospital. I'll follow up. Her prognosis is good, Doctor. Patel continued, perhaps sensing his tension. Children's brains have remarkable healing capabilities. The fact that her intracranial pressure has remained stable is an excellent sign. Jack absorbed this medical information, filing it away methodically. And long-term? Will there be effects? The question caught in his throat momentarily, the fear he'd been suppressing surfacing briefly. It's too early to say definitively, but I'm optimistic. The impact was significant enough to cause unconsciousness, which is why we're being cautious with the sedation. But the imaging doesn't show structural damage that would indicate permanent impairment. No. Patel's voice was measured, honest without being either falsely reassuring or unnecessarily alarming. Thank you, Doctor, Jack said simply. After she left, he found himself alone with the rhythmic beeping of machines and the soft sound of Lily's breathing. The hospital room felt strangely similar to forward operating bases he'd known. The institutional impersonality, the underlying tension, the constant alertness to changing conditions. Only here, the mission wasn't classified intelligence gathering or hostage extraction. It was much more personal and infinitely more important. Jack pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. 3 rings, then a familiar voice. Carter, this is unexpected. Marcus Winters sounded exactly the same, clipped, precise, slightly sardonic. Marcus, it's Jack. He paused, watching Lily's chest rise and fall beneath the thin hospital blanket. I need information on a gang called the Iron Serpents. Everything you can find. Another pause as he listened to his former intelligence officer's questions. Yes, it's personal. He didn't elaborate further. He didn't need to. Marcus Winters had been Jack's intelligence officer for 3 tours in regions where asking the wrong question could get you killed. The man understood operational security and the value of discretion. I'll get back to you within 4 hours, Marcus replied. No further questions asked. Appreciate it. Jack ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. The hospital room felt cold despite the Arizona heat filtering through the blinds. Jack stared at his daughter's small form beneath the starched white sheets, taking inventory of every scratch, every bruise. Her right cheek had a purple contusion that disappeared into her hairline, where the doctors had shaved a small section to apply 5 neat stitches. The exposed skin looked impossibly vulnerable. Both her hands bore minor abrasions from trying to protect her flowers. The nurses had cleaned the dirt from beneath her fingernails, but Jack could still see traces. Evidence of her work in the garden just that morning. Just that morning. It seemed like years ago now. Jack remembered waking up at the base, eager to finally be heading home. The deployment had been extended twice, pushing his return date back by nearly 3 weeks. Each time, he'd had to make the difficult video call to Lily, watching her brave smile as she assured him it was okay, even as disappointment shadowed her young eyes. It's just 2 more weeks, Daddy, she'd said during their last call. The zinnias will still be blooming when you get home, I promise. And wait until you see how many donations we've collected. That had been 4 days ago. Now she lay unconscious, injured by men who had targeted a child's charity stand. The thought sent a cold current of rage through him, different from the adrenaline-fueled fury of combat. This was deeper, more primal, and far more dangerous. Jack moved to the window, careful to stand to the side rather than directly in front of it, a habit from too many deployments in hostile territory. From the third floor, he could see part of the town square where it had happened, the fountain where his little girl's head had struck stone. The square looked deceptively peaceful from this distance, a classic small-town centerpiece with benches, trees offering shade, and pathways crossing between local businesses. The kind of wholesome Americana that politicians referenced in speeches about the country they were fighting to protect. But Jack knew better than most how appearances could be deceiving. In his career, he'd visited villages that seemed tranquil until you noticed the fear in residents' eyes when certain names were mentioned. Towns where daily life proceeded with apparent normality while brutal enforcement mechanisms operated just beneath the surface. Pinewood Creek had felt different when he'd chosen it as their home 3 years ago, after Claire's death. Small, quiet, unremarkable. A place where Lily could grow up safely while he completed his final years of service. The relatively close proximity to the base had been practical, but the town's apparent wholesomeness had been the deciding factor. Now he questioned everything about that decision. Had the Iron Serpents been here all along? Had he failed to see the signs of corruption and intimidation? Had his focus on protecting Lily from external threats blinded him to dangers closer to home? His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Marcus, working on it. Preliminary info incoming. These guys have a bigger footprint than you'd expect for small-town thugs. Jack frowned. That matched his own instincts. The Iron Serpents had operated with impunity for too long. That suggested protection from someone with authority. The implication was clear. Law enforcement, likely Sheriff Davis himself, was compromised. It explained the sheriff's conspicuous absence, the lack of police presence at the hospital, the fact that no arrests had been made despite multiple witnesses to the assault on Lily. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Garcia entered carrying a small duffel bag. She moved quietly, with the natural consideration of an elementary school teacher accustomed to modulating her presence. Martha sent clothes, she said quietly. And toiletries. She thought you might not want to leave. She was right. Thank you. Jack accepted the bag with genuine gratitude. Martha Jenkins had been a godsend since Claire's death, checking in on Lily after school when Jack's duties kept him on base later than expected, ensuring the houseplant survived his deployments, providing the maternal presence that his daughter desperately missed. Sarah approached Lily's bed, gently touching the girl's hand. Unlike some visitors who seemed uncertain how to interact with an unconscious patient, she showed no discomfort. She's a fighter. Like her father, the compliment wasn't empty flattery. Sarah had known Lily since their move to Pinewood Creek, first as her third-grade teacher and later as a family friend. She'd witnessed the girl's resilience firsthand after losing her mother, how she'd channeled her grief into her garden and her fundraising efforts. Jack didn't respond directly. Instead, he shifted the conversation to what he needed most: information. What can you tell me about Sheriff Davis? Sarah's expression turned guarded. She glanced toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers, an instinctive caution that spoke volumes about the climate in Pinewood Creek. He's been sheriff for almost 15 years, runs unopposed every election, and she hesitated. People say he has an arrangement with certain elements in town. The Iron Serpents. Among others. Sarah kept her voice low. There's never been proof, just whispers. Jack recognized the pattern from his intelligence work. Official corruption rarely left an obvious trail, but it created distinctive atmospheric conditions, whispered conversations, averted gazes, topics that townspeople instinctively avoided. And no one challenges it? The last person who tried. Sarah glanced at Lily, then back to Jack. His business burned down. Insurance wouldn't cover it. They claimed electrical problems, but everyone knew better. He moved away within a month. His family, too. The story was familiar, not in its specifics, but in its outline. Jack had seen similar patterns of intimidation in regions where official authority had been compromised. Once fear became the primary governance mechanism, resistance became increasingly costly and rare. How long has this been going on? Jack asked, mentally reconstructing the timeline. He'd been deployed multiple times since moving to Pinewood Creek, sometimes for months at a stretch. Lily stayed with Martha during those periods, with Sarah checking in regularly. The Iron Serpents have been around for years, but they've become more aggressive in the past 18 months. Started with protection fees for businesses on Main Street, then expanded to include the whole town square. Lately, they've been moving into residential areas, intimidating homeowners, especially the elderly. Jack processed this information silently. It fit the emerging pattern, a system of intimidation that had become so ingrained that most people couldn't even see the cage they lived in anymore. In Lily's stand? Had they threatened her before? The question was difficult to ask, laden with parental guilt. Should he have anticipated this? Protected her better? Sarah shook her head. Not specifically, but the square was their territory. Any business operating there was expected to pay. Lily's stand was small, but it was becoming popular. People came specifically to buy her flowers. The Iron Serpents wouldn't have liked that independence. Jack nodded, filing away this context. The attack hadn't been random. It had been a calculated demonstration of power, a message to the town about who controlled public spaces and commercial activity. A nurse came in to check Lily's vitals, making notes on a digital chart. She worked efficiently, professionally, but Jack noticed how she avoided making eye contact with him. Word had spread about who he was, what had happened. "Commander Carter?" The nurse finally addressed him as she finished. "There's a man in the waiting room asking about Lily. Says he's Sheriff Davis." Jack felt a cold stillness settle over him. The timing was interesting. Nearly 24 hours after the incident, the sheriff finally appeared. Not at the scene, not at the station taking witness statements, but here, seeking a private conversation with Jack. He looked at Sarah, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "A warning. Tell him I'll speak with him when my daughter's condition is more stable," Jack replied evenly. "And please don't allow anyone except hospital staff and Miss Dom Garcia into this room." The nurse nodded, seeming relieved not to be caught between authorities. After she left, Sarah moved closer. "Be careful with Davis," she whispered. "He has a way of making problems for people who don't cooperate." I'm familiar with the type. Jack had encountered similar figures across 4 continents. Men who wielded official authority for personal gain, who confused power with strength, who believed accountability was for others. Sarah stayed for another hour sitting quietly with Lily, while Jack used the small attached bathroom to wash his face and change into the fresh clothes Martha had sent. The cold water helped clear his mind, sharpening his focus. Looking in the mirror, Jack assessed himself objectively. At 38, he still maintained the physical condition required of active special operators, lean and functional rather than showy. His face revealed little of his thoughts, a professional asset developed over years of high-stakes operations where emotional control could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The man in the mirror looked ordinary enough, the kind of fit, short-haired father you might see coaching Little League or carrying groceries from the car. Nothing about his appearance suggested the specialized training he'd received, the classified operations he'd led, the capacity for controlled violence he could deploy when necessary. That ordinariness had always been an advantage in his work. It would be an advantage now, as he gathered intelligence and planned his response to the Iron Serpents. By noon, Jack's phone buzzed with an encrypted file. Marcus had been thorough and quick as always. The Iron Serpents, origins, territory, criminal activities, suspected but unproven connections to drug trafficking and weapons dealing. Most importantly, names, locations, patterns. Jack sat in the vinyl chair beside Lily's bed, methodically scrolling through the intelligence report. The details painted a disturbing picture. The Iron Serpents weren't just local bullies. They were a node in a larger network that stretched across state lines. Victor "Scarface" Malone headed the operation, 6'4", approximately 280 pounds, with a jagged scar running from his right temple down to his jaw. Former military, dishonorably discharged for assault on a superior officer. 3 domestic violence complaints, all mysteriously withdrawn. Multiple arrests for aggravated assault and extortion, but no convictions. The charges always seemed to disappear before trial. Jack studied Malone's photograph dispassionately. The man had the look of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain, not the cold professional application of force that Jack had been trained in, but something more personal and sadistic. The kind of man who would destroy a child's charity stand and feel powerful doing it. The intelligence report detailed Malone's inner circle. Tyler "Twitch" Reynolds, methamphetamine production specialist with a history of schizophrenia, dangerous because of his unpredictability. Kevin "Butcher" Leary, former Army, dishonorable discharge for assaulting a superior officer, known for excessive violence even within the gang. Henry Dobson, former accountant, now the Serpent's money launderer and financial strategist. The brains to Malone's brawn. and a regular poker game every Thursday night at the Rattlesnake Bar, where Malone and his 6 most trusted lieutenants gathered to divide territories and profits. Today was Thursday. Jack continued scrolling, memorizing faces, locations, patterns of movement. The Iron Serpents operated with a level of discipline unusual for a local gang. They maintained communication security, rotated meeting locations, used cutouts for their more serious criminal enterprises. These weren't amateurs. They had systems, protocols, operational security measures. His thumb paused over a photo of Malone at a local political fundraiser, standing beside Sheriff Davis. Both men smiling, both men comfortable. The caption noted the picture was from 3 months ago. Another text from Marcus. County financial records show Davis purchased a vacation property in Mexico last year. Sheriff's salary doesn't explain it. Keep digging? Jack texted back a single word, yes. The connection was clear now. Sheriff Davis wasn't just turning a blind eye to the Iron Serpent's activities. He was actively participating in their criminal enterprise. The protection racket extended to official protection, charges dismissed, evidence lost, investigations stalled. Jack set the phone down and returned to Lily's bedside. The steady beep of monitors provided a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. Slow, measured, controlled. He took his daughter's small hand in his, careful not to disturb the IV line. "I'm here, Lily Pad," he whispered. "Daddy's got you now." For a moment, his mind flashed back to another hospital room 5 years earlier. Claire, withered by the aggressive cancer that had taken her in just 11 months from diagnosis to death. Lily, only 5 then, too young to fully understand what was happening, but old enough to sense the wrongness of it all. Jack, freshly returned from a deployment he couldn't cut short despite his wife's condition, holding her hand just as he now held his daughter's. The circumstances were different, but the helpless rage felt similar. Both situations presented enemies he couldn't fight directly. Cancer then, human corruption now. But at least this time, there were tangible targets for his specialized capabilities. The afternoon stretched into evening. Nurses came and went. Sarah brought food that Jack barely touched. A hospital chaplain offered prayers that Jack acknowledged with a polite nod, though his own relationship with faith had been complicated by what he'd seen and done in service. Outside, the Arizona sun blazed across the western sky before finally dipping below the horizon. The hospital lighting remained constant, that particular institutional fluorescence that belonged neither to day nor night, contributing to the timeless limbo of medical facilities. Jack maintained his vigil, reviewing the intelligence Marcus had provided, constructing and discarding various approaches to the problem at hand. His training emphasized mission planning, careful consideration of objectives, resources, terrain, opposition capabilities, and acceptable risk levels. But this wasn't a military operation with defined parameters. The objectives were clear: protect Lily, neutralize the threat posed by the Iron Serpents. But the execution required careful calibration. Dr. Patel returned at 6, studying the monitors and checking Lily's pupils with a small pen light. "Brain activity looks good," she said. "We'll start reducing sedation early tomorrow if these trends continue." "Will there be—" Jack struggled to form the question. "Lasting effects?" Patel's expression softened. "Children's brains have remarkable plasticity. There may be some temporary memory issues, possibly headaches, but the imaging doesn't suggest permanent damage." Relief washed over Jack, so powerful it nearly bucked his knees. He'd seen traumatic brain injuries up close, had carried teammates off battlefields with similar wounds. Not all of them returned to duty. Not all of them returned to themselves. "Thank you," he managed. "She'll need careful monitoring for the next few weeks. Quiet activities. No screens. No exertion. Doctor." Patel made a note in the chart. "She'll need you there, Commander." The implication was clear. Lily's recovery would require Jack's presence, not just physically, but fully engaged. No deployments. No distractions. It aligned with the decision he'd already been considering, accelerating his transition to full retirement rather than the partial reserve status he currently maintained. "I understand," he said. "My duty assignment flexibility allows for family medical situations." It was a half-truth. His position did allow for compassionate leave, but extended absence would likely mean reassignment or early retirement. Given the circumstances, Jack had already decided his path forward. After the doctor left, Jack returned to his sentinel position beside Lily's bed. He began reading aloud from the book Sarah had brought, one of Lily's favorites about a girl who discovers magical creatures living in her garden. His voice was low but clear, maintaining the fiction that she could hear him even in her sedated state. To the nurses, he appeared to be a concerned father, nothing more. They didn't notice how he mentally cataloged shift changes, security camera positions, and hospital exit roads. They didn't recognize how he positioned himself to maintain sightlines to both the door and window, or how his outwardly relaxed posture masked a state of constant readiness. Old habits from dangerous places. Situational awareness that had kept him alive through multiple deployments to regions where threat could emerge from any quarter. Now those same habits were focused on protecting his daughter in what should have been the safety of their chosen hometown. At 6 o'clock, Nurse Chen brought him a sandwich and coffee. "You should get some rest," she advised. "We have your number if anything changes." Jack looked at Lily's peaceful face. "I'll step out for fresh air soon," he promised. When Nurse Chen left, Jack opened the duffel bag Sarah had brought. Inside were the clothes Martha had packed, toiletries, and something else. A small notebook with pressed flowers from Lily's garden between the pages. A Father's Day gift from the previous year. Jack had carried it on his last deployment. He carefully turned the pages, each preserved bloom labeled in Lily's meticulous handwriting. Desert marigold, Mom's favorite. Penstemon attracts hummingbirds. Wild zinnia, first flower I grew from seeds. The simple artifact connected him to his daughter's passion, to the careful tending that had produced these blooms, to the generosity that had inspired her to sell them for children less fortunate than herself. Beneath the notebook was a folded piece of paper. Jack recognized Martha's handwriting. "Some of the men who did this eat at the Rattlesnake Bar on Route 16 most nights. Nobody does anything because everyone's afraid." "But you're not afraid, are you, Jack?" Martha Jenkins was 72 years old, a widow who had lived in Pinewood Creek her entire life. She had watched her hometown change, had seen the gradual encroachment of corruption and intimidation, and she had recognized something in Jack from the beginning, a capability that went beyond his obvious physical fitness or military bearing. Jack carefully refolded the note and tucked it into his pocket. No, he wasn't afraid. Not for himself. But the cold fear for his daughter had settled into something different now, a crystalline clarity of purpose that he recognized from his most dangerous missions. The evening deepened into night. Hospital sounds diminished as visitors left and the facility settled into its overnight rhythm. Jack maintained his position beside Lily, occasionally checking his phone for updates from Marcus, whose intelligence gathering continued to build a comprehensive picture of the Iron Serpent's operation and their connections to local authorities. At 7:45 p.m., Jack kissed his daughter's forehead and whispered, "I'll be back soon, Lily Pad. Daddy has something important to take care of." He retrieved his duffel bag from under the chair and walked out, nodding to the night nurse. In the hospital bathroom, he changed from his rumpled civilian clothes into dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt. Nothing distinctive, nothing memorable. The clothes were deliberately chosen, functional, unremarkable, appropriate for a grieving father stepping out for air or a drink. They also provided freedom of movement and concealed the lean muscle built through years of specialized training. In the mirror, Jack studied his own reflection. The face that looked back was one he recognized from deployment briefings, focused, calm, detached. The face of a man about to step into a calculated risk. From the hospital parking lot, he called Sheriff Davis. The conversation was brief and unsatisfying. "These matters are complicated, Commander," the sheriff said, discomfort evident in his voice. "The Iron Serpents have been a presence here for years. We have to work within the system." "My daughter's in the hospital," Jack replied evenly. "And I'm sorry about that, truly. But we can't just go arresting people without proper evidence and procedure. That's not how things work." "No," Jack agreed, "that's not how things work at all." As he hung up, Jack understood what he'd suspected all along. There would be no justice from official channels. Whether through fear, corruption, or simple inertia, the system had failed, not just his daughter, but the entire town. The setting sun painted the Arizona desert in shades of crimson and gold as Jack drove the back roads toward Route 16. His truck, a nondescript Ford F-150 that blended with dozens of others in town, kicked up dust clouds that hung in the still evening air. The radio remained off. Jack preferred the silence, needed the mental space to think through what came next. The desert landscape passed in a blur of sagebrush and cactus, punctuated by the occasional mobile home or isolated ranch house. This region of Arizona represented a particular American freedom: space, independence, distance from authority. But that same isolation created vulnerability when corruption took root, when those meant to protect became predators instead. As he drove, Jack's mind executed the pre-mission routine ingrained through years of special operations, mentally reviewing intelligence, assessing the operating environment, considering contingencies, establishing rules of engagement. His training had taught him to analyze situations methodically, identify the objective, assess resources, plan entry and exit strategies, calculate acceptable risk. But this wasn't a military operation with defined parameters. This was personal in a way nothing in his career had prepared him for. The objective was clear enough: stop the iron serpents from hurting anyone else. But the execution? That required careful calibration. Jack had no desire to become the thing he was fighting against. Unlike the missions he'd undertaken for his country, this operation had no official sanction, no rules of engagement established by higher authorities, no extraction plan if things went sideways. The parameters and limitations would be entirely self-imposed, guided only by his own moral compass and the example he wanted to set for his daughter. Jack had been trained to apply violence with surgical precision when necessary, to neutralize threats while minimizing collateral damage. Those skills had been developed for national security objectives, but they were transferable to this more personal mission. A text notification lit up his phone screen. Another update from Marcus. Sheriff Davis made 3 calls after speaking with you, 1 to the mayor, 1 to a burner phone registered in Phoenix, 1 to the Rattlesnake Bar. Be advised, they're expecting company. Jack wasn't surprised. In small towns, information traveled fast. Everyone knew everyone's business, or thought they did. What they didn't know was him, what he was capable of, what lines he would and wouldn't cross. The burner phone contacts suggested connections beyond Pinewood Creek, perhaps to the larger criminal network the Iron Serpents appeared to be part of. That aligned with Marcus's earlier intelligence about weapons trafficking and drug distribution that extended across county and state lines. Jack made a mental note of this additional complication, but remained focused on the immediate objective. The broader criminal enterprise could be addressed by federal authorities once the local threat to Lily and the town was neutralized. Route 16 stretched straight ahead, a narrow 2-lane blacktop cutting through the desert. Few cars passed at this hour, most travelers having reached their destinations for the night. In the distance, a neon sign glowed in the gathering darkness. The Rattlesnake Bar, a low sprawling building of weathered wood and corrugated metal. Jack slowed as he approached, assessing the location from a tactical perspective. The building stood isolated, 100 yards from its nearest neighbor. Parking area in front filled with motorcycles and pickup trucks. Secondary lot behind the structure, less visible from the road. 2 visible entrances, main door at the front, service access on the eastern side. Likely a rear exit as well, standard for commercial buildings. The isolation worked both for and against his objectives. Less chance of civilian bystanders being caught in any confrontation, but also less public scrutiny of what happened inside. The clock on his truck dashboard read 8:30 p.m. as he pulled into the dirt lot behind the Rattlesnake Bar. From his reconnaissance, he knew the poker game would be in full swing by now. 7 men, all armed to varying degrees. The bar's regular customers would be mostly gone by 10 apiece, leaving just the hardcore drinkers and the Serpent's associates. Jack sat motionless in his truck, breathing deeply and systematically, the way he'd been trained. In his mind, he walked through the coming confrontation, step by step. Contingencies, alternatives, risks. This wasn't a military operation. No backup team, no extraction plan. If things went wrong, there would be consequences that no amount of training could prepare him for. For the first time since receiving Martha's news, Jack allowed himself to feel the full force of his rage. The cold, calculating part of his mind cataloged exactly what he could do to each man inside that bar, the precise amount of damage his training would allow him to inflict. He remembered Lily's excited face the day they built her first flower stand, how she had meticulously planned where each type of bloom would go, the way she carefully counted donations each evening, setting aside exactly 10% for new seeds and soil, the rest for the children's hospital. Jack remembered the phone calls from deployment, her small voice asking when he'd be home, trying so hard to be brave. He remembered promising her that he was making the world safer, that what he did mattered. What kind of world had he been fighting for if men like Victor Malone could terrorize a community with impunity? What kind of safety had he secured for his own child if she couldn't sell flowers for charity without fear? Then just as deliberately, he set the rage aside. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not now. Not if he wanted to be the father Lily needed when she woke up. The emotions were compartmentalized, stored away behind the professional discipline that had allowed him to function in the most stressful environments imaginable. What remained was cold clarity, a focused, precise intent unclouded by personal feeling. Jack checked his watch. 9:30 p.m. In 15 minutes, the bartender would take a smoke break. The side door would be propped open briefly. The security camera in the hallway had been broken for months, according to Marcus's intel. He reached beneath the seat and removed a small tactical flashlight, high lumen, strobe capability. Not a weapon, but in the right hands, it might as well be. Jack tucked it into his back pocket and exited the truck, locking it with a soft chirp. The night air carried the scent of creosote and dust. A gibbous moon hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. No streetlights here, just the dim glow from the bar's neon signs and the distant headlights of cars on the highway. Jack moved with deliberate casualness, his posture relaxed, his pace unhurried. To a casual observer, he would appear to be just another customer arriving for a late drink. Nothing in his movement suggested the lethal capability contained within his ordinary frame. This was another skill honed through years of special operations, the ability to blend, to appear unremarkable, to move through spaces without triggering the instinctive warnings that dangerous men often radiate. In countries where being identified as American military meant death, Jack had learned to become invisible in plain sight. He circled the building, keeping to the shadows, noting entries and exits. 3 doors, main entrance in front, kitchen access on the side, emergency exit in back. 2 windows in the men's restroom, small but navigable in an emergency. Roof access via an external ladder on the east wall. The tactical assessment was automatic, his brain processing the information and generating contingency plans without conscious effort. Primary exit routes. Secondary options if those were compromised. Choke points to avoid. Areas that offered tactical advantage if confrontation became necessary. Jack positioned himself near the side entrance, watching as the bartender, a heavy-set man in his 50s, pushed the door open with his shoulder and lit a cigarette. The man's movements suggested no particular alertness or suspicion, despite the warning Marcus had intercepted. Either the message hadn't been fully communicated, or the bartender wasn't part of the inner circle. Jack remained motionless until the man finished his smoke break and went back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. A small operational security fissure that created an opportunity. He gave it another minute, then approached the side entrance with the same casual demeanor. No furtiveness, no hesitation. Just a man entering a bar for a drink at the end of a long day. At 9:45 p.m., Jack Carter entered the Rattlesnake Bar through that side entrance. To anyone watching, he was just another customer looking for a drink. They couldn't see the invisible line he had crossed. From Commander Carter, decorated Navy SEAL with a spotless record, to something else entirely. A father with nothing left to lose. And in crossing that line, Jack felt a terrifying clarity. He understood now what had motivated men throughout history to stand alone against overwhelming odds. Not courage. Not righteousness. Something far simpler and more primal. Love. The Rattlesnake Bar reeked of stale beer, cigarettes, and desperation. Country music blared from ancient speakers, barely audible over the raucous laughter from the back room. A neon sign advertising tequila buzzed and flickered, casting sickly blue shadows across worn wooden floors. Jack paused just inside the entrance, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim lighting while taking inventory. 3 locals at the bar, a couple in a corner booth, 1 passed-out patron, and a bartender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. No immediate threats. The real action was behind the red velvet curtain at the back, the private room where Victor Malone held court on poker nights. Jack felt the weight of his decisions settling into his bones. 16 years of military discipline had taught him to evaluate risks methodically, to plan for contingencies, to maintain situational awareness even in the most chaotic environments. But those missions had been sanctioned, conducted with teams, backed by the full might of the United States government. This was different, personal, a line he had never crossed before. The moment Lily's face flashed in his mind, pale against hospital sheets bandaged and bruised, any remaining hesitation dissolved. Some prices were worth paying, some lines worth crossing. Jack scanned the bartender's movements, noting the slight bulge under his apron that suggested a concealed weapon. The man's eyes flicked nervously toward Jack, then quickly away. He'd been told to expect him. A ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, circulating the stagnant air without actually cooling it. Framed photographs of motorcycles and local landmarks lined walls stained by decades of cigarette smoke. Behind the bar, a stuffed rattlesnake coiled in eternal aggression inside a dusty glass case, the establishment's namesake and mascot. Jack took a seat at the bar, positioning himself to see both the front entrance and the curtained doorway. Whiskey. Neat, he told the bartender, sliding a 20 across the scarred wooden surface. New in town? The bartender asked, not out of friendliness but suspicion. Just passing through. Jack's tone discouraged further conversation. The bartender placed the whiskey in front of him and retreated to the other end of the bar, pretending to polish glasses while watching Jack in the cloudy mirror behind the liquor bottles. Jack noted how the man's hand kept straying toward his right side, nervous, untrained, dangerous in his unpredictability. The whiskey arrived. Jack didn't touch it. Instead, he listened to the fragments of conversation drifting from behind the curtain. Should have seen her face when the stand collapsed. Stupid kid thought she could just set up shop without paying dues. Taught this whole pathetic town a lesson. Each word stoked the cold fury burning in Jack's chest. Memories of his military training battled with primal instincts of a father whose child had been harmed. The SEAL in him wanted to execute a precise, measured response. The father wanted to tear apart anyone who had hurt his little girl. Then, unmistakably, Victor Malone's gravelly voice. To the iron serpents! The only law that matters in this dust bowl. Glasses clinked. Men laughed. Jack felt something shift in body, not hot rage, but something colder and more focused. He'd fought for his country, for abstract ideals of freedom and justice. But this was different. This was personal in a way nothing had ever been. He let his gaze wander across the bar, cataloging every detail with methodical precision. The emergency exit sign with the burned-out E. The slight discoloration on the floor where blood had been imperfectly cleaned. The hollow-eyed waitress delivering drinks to the corner booth, her sleeve riding up to reveal finger-shaped bruises on her wrist. Jack had seen places like this before, in countries torn by war and corruption. Spaces where power operated unchecked, where the vulnerable learned to avert their eyes and speak in whispers. He had fought against such systems abroad. Now he found himself confronting the same darkness at home. A memory surfaced. Lily, at 7 years old, looking up from a book about butterfly migrations, her face troubled. Daddy, why do people hurt each other? She had asked. The innocent question of a child trying to make sense of a world where violence existed alongside beauty. He had given her a soldier's answer then, sanitized for a child's ears. Sometimes people forget how to be kind, Lily Pad, and sometimes other people have to remind them. Tonight he would deliver that reminder. The curtain to the back room parted, and a large man with a shaved head and iron-crossed tattoos stumbled out, heading for the restroom. One of Malone's lieutenants. Jack recognized him from Marcus's file. Kevin Butcher Leary, former Army, dishonorable discharge for assaulting a superior officer. Known for excessive violence even within the Iron Serpents. Jack gave him a 10-second head start before rising from his stool. He left the untouched whiskey on the bar and moved toward the curtain. The bartender started to say something, then fell silent at the look in Jack's eyes. Behind the curtain, 8 men sat around a felt-covered table littered with hashish, cards, and empty bottles. Victor Malone, enormous even while seated, was in the middle of a story, gesturing expansively. And then the little brat tried to grab her jar back, like she had any right. He mimicked a whining voice. That's for sick children. Excuse me. Jack's quiet voice somehow cut through the cacophony. The room fell silent. 8 pairs of eyes turned to the intruder. Jack took in the scene with a single sweep. The positioning of each man. The weapons visible and concealed. The distances between them. The narrow confines that would work both for and against him if this turned physical. Victor Malone was exactly as his file described. 6'4", approximately 280 pounds, with a jagged scar running from his right temple down to his jaw. A knife wound, Jack assessed, old and poorly stitched. The man's eyes were bloodshot but alert, narrowing as he registered Jack's presence. To Malone's right sat a wiry man with a patchy beard and nervous hands. Marcus's intel identified him as Tyler Twitch Reynolds, the gang's methamphetamine specialist with a history of schizophrenia, dangerous because of his unpredictability. On Malone's left was a heavy-set older man with graying temples and an expensive watch that didn't match his biker aesthetic. Henry Dobson, former accountant, now the Serpent's money launderer and financial strategist. The brains to Malone's brawn. The remaining men were foot soldiers, enforcers who followed orders without question. Each had a history of escalating violence. Each had been in and out of the system for years. Each had found a home in the Iron Serpents, where their worst impulses were rewarded rather than constrained. Malone recovered first. Private game. Get lost. I just have a question. Jack stepped fully into the room, letting the curtain fall closed behind him. Were you talking about the flower stand in the town square? A dangerous smile spread across Malone's scarred face. What's it to you? Jack met his gaze steadily. That was my daughter. For a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickered in Malone's eyes. But surrounded by his men, with alcohol fueling his confidence, it quickly disappeared. Well, Daddy should have taught his little girl to respect the way things work around here. Malone stood slowly, towering over most men. But Jack didn't move, didn't flinch. Now, unless you want to end up in the hospital bed next to her, I suggest you walk out that door and forget what you think you heard. The room tensed. Jack could feel the shift in energy, the anticipation of violence, the predatory focus. These men were used to intimidation working. They were used to fear. What they weren't used to was someone like him. In his peripheral vision, Jack noticed subtle signals passing between the bikers. A nod here, a shifted weight there. They were preparing to move on him. Classic pack behavior, coordinating without seeming to coordinate. Jack had faced worse odds in his career. Terrorist cells in mountain strongholds, insurgents in urban warrens, pirates on storm-tossed ships. But those had been professional engagements with clear objectives and extraction plans. This was personal, with stakes that ran to the core of his being. I'm afraid I can't do that. Jack's voice remained calm. But I'm giving you a choice, all of you. You can come with me to the sheriff's office and turn yourselves in, or this gets complicated. One of the bikers laughed, a high nervous sound that died quickly in the tension-filled room. Malone's face darkened with rage. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? We own this town. I know, sweetheart. The doctor says that will get better soon. Lily looked around the hospital room, orienting herself slowly. Her gaze lingered on the stuffed dolphin beside her pillow, then the IV in her arm, then back to Jack's face. How long was I asleep? She asked. Almost 2 days, Jack said, keeping his voice gentle. You hit your head pretty hard. Recognition dawned in her eyes as memories began to return. My flowers. They ruined all my flowers. And they took the money for the sick kids. Tears welled in her eyes. I tried to stop them, Daddy. I tried. Jack felt a surge of emotion, Barman. Pride in her courage, anguish at her pain, and lingering rage at those who had hurt her. You were so brave, Jack said, his throat tight. Too brave, maybe, but it's all okay now. The men who hurt you can't hurt anyone else. And we're going to plant new flowers, even more beautiful than before. You fixed it? The question contained such simple trust that Jack felt his chest constrict. In Lily's world, Daddy could fix anything. Broken toys, scary nightmares, skinned knees, and now apparently ruthless biker gangs. Jack nodded. I fixed it. Lily seemed to accept this with the simple faith of childhood. But then her brow furrowed slightly, a shadow crossing her face. Are you in trouble? Miss Jenkins says grown-ups get in trouble when they fight. The question caught Jack off guard. How to explain the complexities of what had happened? No, sweetheart. Sometimes when people are doing wrong things and hurting others, someone has to stand up and say, enough. That's not trouble. That's responsibility. She considered this, then nodded solemnly. Like when you go away to protect people. Just like that, Lily's eyes grew heavy again, the conversation clearly taxing her limited energy. I'm still sleepy. That's okay, Jack assured her. Your body needs rest to heal. I'll be right here when you wake up. Promise? She murmured, already drifting off. Promise. Jack squeezed her hand gently. I'm not going anywhere. As Lily slipped back into sleep, Jack noticed this time it was natural slumber rather than medically induced unconsciousness. Her breathing was deeper, more regular, her face relaxed. He sat back in the chair, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She was awake. She knew him. She remembered what happened. All good signs, according to Dr. Patel's assessment. The door opened quietly and Sarah peeked in. Seeing Lily asleep, she entered on tiptoe. Jack gestured that it was okay to speak. She woke up, he said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. She knew me, remembered everything. Sarah's face lit up. That's wonderful, Jack. I'll let the nurses know. She's sleeping naturally now. Doctor said that would happen. Brief periods of wakefulness, then more sleep. Part of the healing process. Sarah nodded, then lowered her voice. The FBI agents are still waiting. I can sit with her if you want to get that over with. Jack hesitated, looking at his daughter's sleeping form. She's okay now, Jack, Sarah said gently. And she'll need you to be free of distractions when she goes home. Recognizing the wisdom in her words, Jack nodded. I'll be quick. Call me immediately if she wakes up. Of course. The administrative conference room was at the end of the corridor, a small, windowless space with an oval table and uncomfortable chairs. Two agents waited inside, a man and a woman, both wearing the unmistakable look of federal law enforcement. Good suits, better posture, and expressions carefully balanced between authority and professionalism. Commander Carter, the woman greeted him, offering her hand. Special Agent Diana Reeves. This is Special Agent Thomas Chen. Thank you for making time for us. Jack shook their hands briefly. My daughter just regained consciousness. I won't be long. Understood, Agent Reeves said. We'll be direct. The confessions you obtained from the Iron Serpents have opened up a significant federal case. Evidence suggests they were part of a weapons smuggling operation moving stolen military hardware across state lines. That doesn't surprise me, Jack said. The pieces had been there in Marcus's intelligence. The connections, the unexplained finances, the operational security that seemed excessive for small-town thugs. We'd like your statement about what happened at the Rattlesnake Bar, Agent Chen said, setting a recording device on the table. And any intelligence you might have on the Iron Serpent's activities. Jack provided a concise, factual account of the previous night's events. He described his conversation with Sheriff Davis, his decision to confront the gang, the brief altercation, and the subsequent confessions. He omitted mention of Marcus and his intelligence gathering, presenting his knowledge of the Serpents as a result of local information and his own observations. The agents exchanged glances when he described subduing 8 armed men without assistance, but neither challenged his account. We've reviewed the security footage from the bar, Agent Reeves noted. It's impressive. Jack didn't respond to the implicit question about his capabilities. Your military record explains some of it, Agent Chen said, consulting a tablet. Multiple commendations, 3 Bronze Stars, combat deployments to locations that are still classified. Jack remained silent. His service record wasn't something he discussed, even with federal agents. What interests us most, Agent Reeves continued, changing tactics, is the weapons trafficking angle. The Iron Serpents appear to be part of a larger network moving stolen military equipment through civilian channels. Given your background, we thought you might have insights. My background is in neutralizing threats, not analyzing supply chains, Jack replied. But if military hardware is involved, you should be looking at base security breaches, not just civilian distribution networks. Agent Chen nodded, making a note. We've already flagged several possibilities. Is there anything else? I need to get back to my daughter. Just one more thing, Agent Chen said. We'll need your continued cooperation as this case develops. The weapons trafficking angle crosses jurisdictional boundaries and potentially involves corrupt officials beyond just Sheriff Davis. You have my cooperation, Jack assured them. But my priority is my daughter's recovery. Of course, Agent Reeves handed him her card. We may have additional questions in the coming days. And Commander Carter? She paused, her professional demeanor softening slightly. What you did took courage. This town is lucky to have you. Jack nodded briefly in acknowledgement and left, eager to return to Lily's room. As he walked back down the corridor, his phone buzzed with a text from Martha. The whole town is talking about what you did. Mr. Rodriguez is reopening his restaurant. The library canceled its security fee. People are walking with their heads up for the first time in years. Jack hadn't done it for them. He'd done it for Lily, for the simple reason that she needed to be safe and those who hurt her needed to face consequences. But he couldn't deny a sense of satisfaction that the ripple effects extended beyond his immediate goal. When he returned to Lily's room, she was still sleeping peacefully. Sarah looked up from the magazine she'd been reading. Everything okay with the feds? She asked quietly. Fine. Just statement taking for now. Sarah studied his face. You know, for someone who just single-handedly dismantled the criminal organization that's terrorized this town for years, you don't look very celebratory. Jack moved to the window looking out over the town. From this vantage point, he could see part of the square where Lily's stand had been, the fountain where she'd been injured, the library and hardware store that had paid protection money to the Serpents. When you're in the military, especially special operations, you learn that the mission is never really about the firefight. It's about what comes after, the rebuilding, the stabilization, the new normal. Taking down the Iron Serpents was necessary, but it's just the beginning. The beginning of what? Jack turned back to face her. Of making sure this doesn't happen again. Of creating something that lasts, Sarah nodded slowly. The town council isn't just offering you the sheriff position out of gratitude, you know. They recognize what you see, that removing the serpents isn't enough. The conditions that allowed them to flourish are still there. Jack hadn't considered the offer seriously until now. His plan had been straightforward: complete his transition to reserve status, raise Lily in peace, perhaps do some private security consulting to stay active. Becoming a small-town sheriff hadn't been on his radar. But Sarah was right. The vulnerabilities that had allowed the Iron Serpents to terrorize Pinewood Creek remained. Economic fragility, geographic isolation, institutional weaknesses. Replacing one corrupt sheriff with another well-intentioned but unprepared newcomer wouldn't address the systemic issues. Think about it, Sarah suggested, gathering her things. I need to get back to the school, but I'll check in later. Do you need anything? We're good, Jack assured her. And Sarah, thank you for everything. After she left, Jack returned to his position beside Lily's bed. The quiet beeping of monitors provided a soothing background rhythm as he considered the future. Not just the immediate concerns of Lily's recovery, but the longer-term questions of where and how they would rebuild their lives. For years, Jack's existence had been defined by clear missions with defined parameters. Even parenting Lily had a certain structure: provide safety, ensure education, instill values, maintain connection despite deployments. But this new territory was more ambiguous. What did Pinewood Creek need? What did Lily need? What did he need, beyond the reflexive drive to protect his daughter at all costs? The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, creating patterns on the opposite wall. Jack watched the play of light and shadow, reminded of desert deployments where such subtle changes in illumination could mean the difference between concealment and exposure. A soft rustling from the bed drew his attention. Lily was stirring again, her eyes fluttering open. Daddy? Her voice was stronger this time. You're still here. Always, Jack assured her, moving closer. How are you feeling? My head still hurts, but not as bad. She attempted to sit up, and Jack gently helped her, adjusting the pillows behind her back. Can I have more water? Jack held the cup as she sipped through the straw, noting with satisfaction that her coordination seemed improved. The doctor says you're doing really well, he told her. If you keep getting better, we might be able to go home soon. Lily's face brightened. Really? Can we stop by my flower stand on the way? I want to see how bad it is. Jack hesitated. The remains of the stand had been cleared away, a decision made by the town maintenance crew after the incident. But Lily would have to face that reality eventually. The stand is gone, sweetheart, he said gently. But that just means we get to build a better one. Stronger. To his relief, Lily nodded thoughtfully rather than becoming upset. Can we use oak this time? Ms. Taylor says oak is the strongest wood. Oak it is, Jack agreed, marveling at her resilience. And maybe a metal roof for shade? And a special drawer for my donation jar, Lily added, warming to the idea. With a lock so no one can take it. That's smart thinking, Lily pad. Lily looked down at her hands, suddenly serious. Daddy, those men who broke my stand, where are they now? Jack weighed his response carefully. They're with the police. They can't hurt anyone else. Good, Lily nodded decisively. They were scary, but you were scarier, weren't you? The question caught Jack off guard. What makes you say that? Lily shrugged slightly. Because you're stronger than anyone. And you always protect people. That's your job. Jack was saved from responding by the arrival of Dr. Patel, who beamed at seeing Lily awake and sitting up. Well, look who's feeling better, the doctor exclaimed, approaching the bed. May I check a few things, Lily? As Dr. Patel conducted her examination, Jack stepped back, reflecting on his daughter's perception of him. In her eyes, he was simply a protector, someone who kept bad things at bay. The reality was more complex, the methods more morally ambiguous, but the essence was true enough. The doctor's assessment was positive. Lily's pupil response was normal, her coordination improving, her cognitive function unimpaired. The headache and fatigue were expected and would likely persist for several weeks, but the prognosis for full recovery was excellent. You're quite the tough cookie, Dr. Patel told Lily with a smile. If everything continues this way, you might be able to go home tomorrow. Just remember, no screens, no reading, no physical exertion for at least a week. Your brain needs rest to heal completely. Can I still grow flowers? Lily asked anxiously. Gentle gardening should be fine with supervision, the doctor replied. But no heavy digging or carrying water buckets for a while. After completing her notes, Dr. Varm Patel turned to Jack. She's doing remarkably well. The brain is resilient, especially in children. Keep the activity levels low, watch for any unusual symptoms, and follow up with the neurologist next week. Thank you, doctor, Jack said sincerely. It's my job, she replied, then added quietly, just as you did yours last night. When the doctor left, Lily's energy began to flag again. Can you read me a story, Daddy? I'm tired, but not sleepy tired. Jack found the book Sarah had brought and picked up where they'd left off earlier, a chapter about the garden girl discovering hidden messages in flower petals. As he read, he watched Lily's reactions, noting with relief that she followed the story without confusion, laughing at the funny parts, asking questions that showed her comprehension was intact. Midway through the chapter, her eyelids began to droop. Will you stay until I wake up again? She asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. I'll be right here, Jack promised. I'm not going anywhere. As Lily drifted back to sleep, Jack realized the truth in his words. He wasn't going anywhere. After 16 years of deployments, of serving his country in distant places, it was time to serve the people closest to him. Pinewood Creek had more healing to do. So did Lily. So perhaps did he. Outside the hospital window, Jack could see the town square in the distance. Tomorrow, he would call his commanding officer and begin the process of retirement. Tomorrow, he would help Lily design a new flower stand, stronger than before. Today, he simply held his daughter's hand and kept his promise to stay. As afternoon faded into evening, the hospital corridor grew quieter. Shift change brought new nurses who checked Lily's vitals with practiced efficiency. Dinner arrived, hospital food that Jack set aside for later, knowing Lily would likely sleep through mealtime. His phone buzzed occasionally with updates from Marcus about the expanding investigation. The confessions Jack had extracted from the Iron Serpents had opened floodgates. The weapons trafficking case was growing, implicating suppliers in Phoenix and as far away as Las Vegas. Sheriff Davis was cooperating with investigators, apparently calculating that reduced charges were preferable to obstruction of justice. The town council had left messages, requesting a meeting when convenient. Jack had Sarah relay that he would be unavailable until Lily was settled at home. As darkness fell, Jack maintained his vigil. The chair was uncomfortable, the room too warm, the rhythmic beeping of monitors a constant reminder of his daughter's vulnerability. But he had endured far worse conditions in his career. Desert heat that blistered skin, mountain cold that froze breath, days without sleep during critical operations. This watch was easier in physical terms, but infinitely more difficult emotionally. Each time he looked at Lily's sleeping form, he was reminded of his greatest fear. Not death or failure, but the possibility of not being there when she needed him most. He had almost missed this crisis, would have been hours too late if his return hadn't been expedited due to a transport schedule change. The randomness of it troubled him, how easily things could have gone differently. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A hospital volunteer peeked in, an elderly woman with kind eyes. Commander Carter, the cafeteria sent this up for you. She entered, carrying a tray with what appeared to be a home-cooked meal rather than standard hospital fare. Mrs. Rodriguez said you'd be hungry and hospital food just wouldn't do. Jack accepted the tray with thanks. The aroma of authentic Mexican cuisine filled the room. Enchiladas, rice, beans, all carefully prepared and still warm. Mr. Rodriguez reopened his restaurant today, the volunteer explained. First thing he did was cook this for you, said it was the least he could do. After she left, Jack stared at the meal, oddly moved by the gesture. He hadn't been seeking gratitude when he confronted the Iron Serpents. He'd been seeking justice for Lily, nothing more. But the connection between his actions and the ripple effects throughout the community was becoming undeniable. As he ate, savoring food that was indeed far superior to standard hospital offerings, Jack considered the sheriff position more seriously. His military career had prepared him for command, for crisis management, for maintaining order in chaotic situations. Those skills could translate to civilian law enforcement, especially in a town needing to rebuild trust in its institutions. But there were drawbacks too. The politics of local government, the constraints of legal procedure after years of operating under military rules of engagement, the visibility of the position when he'd valued privacy for Lily's sake. Most importantly, there was the question of what Lily needed. A stable, present father was at the top of that list. Would becoming sheriff enhance that stability or threaten it? These questions circled in Jack's mind as the night deepened. Hospital sounds faded to the minimal activity of the overnight shift. Lily slept peacefully, her breathing deep and regular. Her color improved. Jack dozed intermittently, the soldier's ability to snatch moments of rest without fully losing awareness. Each time he opened his eyes, his first action was to check Lily, reassuring himself that she was still there, still healing, still safe. Exactly who I'm talking to, Jack replied. 8 men who think intimidating shopkeepers and hurting children makes them powerful. His gaze swept the room. I've spent my career fighting actual terrorists. You're just bullies with motorcycles. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Jack could feel the exact moment when talk ended and action became inevitable. 16 years of combat experience had taught him to recognize the signals, the subtle shift in weight, the almost imperceptible nod between conspirators, the tightening around the eyes. Malone nodded almost imperceptibly, and one of his lieutenants moved to flank Jack from the left. Last chance, Jack said quietly. Make the right choice. Malone's answer was to lunge forward, meaty fists swinging toward Jack's face with surprising speed for a man his size. What happened next would later be described by the shock bartender as, like something out of a movie, except nobody got back up. Time seemed to slow for Jack, as it always did in combat. His senses sharpened, peripheral awareness expanded. He could hear the shuffle of feet behind him, the intake of breath from the man flanking his left, the soft click of a switchblade opening somewhere to his right. Jack sidestepped the punch with fluid economy, simultaneously blocking the lieutenant's advance with a precise strike to the solar plexus. Both movements flowed together as if choreographed, the product of thousands of hours of training in the world's most elite fighting force. The man on his left doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Jack pivoted, using the momentum to redirect Malone's own weight against him, sending the larger man stumbling into the poker table. Malone staggered forward from his own momentum. By the time he regained his balance and turned, 2 of his men were already on the floor. What the fuck? His exclamation cut short as Jack's elbow connected with his temple, sending him crashing into the poker table. Cards, chips, and cash exploded into the air like confetti, momentarily distracting the remaining serpents. Jack used that split second of confusion to create space, positioning himself with his back to the wall. The remaining bikers scrambled to their feet, pulling knives and brass knuckles. In the confined space, their numbers worked against them, creating confusion rather than advantage. Take him, Malone roared, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Jack moved among them like water, flowing, redirecting, exploiting each opening. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Each strike calculated for maximum efficiency rather than maximum damage. A knife thrust became an opportunity. Jack caught the attacker's wrist, applied precise pressure to the radial nerve, and the weapon clattered to the floor along with its wielder. A wild swing with brass knuckles missed his head by inches. Jack countered with a short, sharp strike to the sternum, followed by a leg sweep that sent another serpent crashing into his comrades. The entire confrontation unfolded like a violent dance, with Jack as the choreographer rather than a participant. His body moved through patterns ingrained through years of specialized training, muscles responding to threats before his conscious mind fully processed them. These weren't enemy combatants, they were civilians, regardless of their actions. The discipline instilled through years of special operations training meant Jack calibrated his response precisely, enough force to neutralize, not to kill. In the cramped back room, surrounded by men who meant him harm, Jack moved with lethal grace. His training had prepared him for operations in close quarters, for adapting to unforeseen circumstances, for maintaining situational awareness under extreme pressure. One serpent managed to grab a bottle, swinging it in a vicious arc toward Jack's head. Jack deflected the strike with his forearm, simultaneously driving his knee into the man's midsection. As the biker doubled over, Jack removed the bottle from nerveless fingers and placed it carefully on the table, an oddly gentle gesture amid the chaos. Throughout the confrontation, Jack's mind remained cold and analytical, even as his body executed complex combat maneuvers. Part of him stood apart, observing with professional detachment. This was the compartmentalization he had been taught, the ability to perform under pressure without emotional interference. But another part, deeper and more primal, fed on the justice being dispensed. Each time his fist connected with flesh, each time another serpent fell, the image of Lily in her hospital bed flashed before him, not to fuel rage but to reinforce purpose. Twitch Reynolds drew a concealed pistol from his ankle holster. Before he could raise it, Jack was there, disarming him with a technique taught only to special forces, a precise combination of pressure points and joint manipulation that rendered the weapon useless without breaking bones. "Stay down," Jack advised as the gun clattered away under the table. Reynolds wisely complied. Henry Dobson, the accountant-turned-criminal, made no move to join the fight. He remained seated, hands visible on the table, watching with calculating eyes as his associates were systematically neutralized. "Smart man," Jack acknowledged with a nod. 67 seconds after Malone threw the first punch, 7 iron serpents lay groaning on the floor amid the wreckage of the poker table. Some clutched injured limbs. Others simply lay still, the fight knocked out of them. Only Victor Malone remained semi-vertical, pinned against the wall with his arm wrenched behind him at an angle human joints weren't designed to reach. Jack applied precisely enough pressure to keep the larger man immobilized without causing permanent damage. "I think it's time we revisited that choice I offered," Jack said, his breathing barely elevated despite the exertion. "Sheriff's office, or this gets worse." The room was eerily silent now. The only sounds the labored breathing of the fallen serpents and the muffled twang of country music from the bar beyond the curtain. "You're dead," Malone gasped through the pain. "You're a dead man. You've got no idea what you just started." Jack increased the pressure slightly, causing Malone to inhale sharply. "What I started? No. This is what you started. When you targeted my daughter," he leaned closer. "Here's what happens next. You and your friends are going to confess to what you did. You're going to return every dollar you've extorted from this town. And you're going to pray that my daughter wakes up without permanent damage." Malone's face contorted with a mixture of pain and defiance. "We've got protection. You can't touch us." "Sheriff Davis?" Jack asked quietly. "I already know about that arrangement." Surprise flickered in Malone's eyes. "What you don't seem to understand," Jack continued, "is that whatever local protection you've bought won't help you with federal charges. Weapons trafficking across state lines, RICO violations, the kind of charges that make state sentences look like parking tickets. This was a calculated bluff based on Marcus's intelligence suggesting larger criminal connections." From Malone's expression, Jack knew he'd hit the mark. "And why would I do any of that?" Malone spat, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Because I'm giving you a chance I don't think you deserve." Jack's voice dropped lower. "The alternative is I start showing this town exactly what I learned in 16 years of dealing with people much scarier than you." For the first time, real fear crept into Malone's eyes. Whatever he saw in Jack's expression convinced him the threat wasn't empty. In that moment, Jack recognized a line he was approaching, a boundary between controlled force and something darker. It would be so easy to apply just a fraction more pressure, to feel the larger man's shoulder dislocate, to deliver pain commensurate with what Lily had suffered. But that wasn't why he was here. That wasn't the example he wanted to set for his daughter, even if she would never know. "Boys," Jack addressed the other gang members without taking his eyes off Malone, "your leader has a decision to make. I suggest you encourage him to make the right one." From the floor, Twitch Reynolds spoke up, his voice shaky. "Vic, man, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Malone snarled, but it was a token protest. Jack could feel the shift in the room's energy. The spell was breaking. These men had followed Malone because he seemed untouchable, because his violence had always succeeded. Now they were witnessing something they didn't understand. Controlled power that made their own brutality look amateurish. "Think about it, Malone," Jack said, easing the pressure slightly, but maintaining control. "You go to the sheriff's office. You confess to assaulting my daughter and extorting local businesses. You face state charges, serve some time, but walk away from the federal investigation." He paused to let that sink in. "Or you resist, and I make a call to some former colleagues who specialize in dismantling criminal enterprises. People who make me look gentle. People who will tear your organization apart so thoroughly that your great-grandchildren will be afraid to buy motorcycles." Malone's resistance was crumbling. Jack could see the calculations happening behind the man's bloodshot eyes, weighing options, assessing risks, recognizing that he'd encountered someone beyond his experience. The curtain parted suddenly, and the bartender appeared, shotgun raised. "Let him go, or—" His threat died in his throat as Jack looked at him, a calm, steady gaze that carried more menace than any shouted warning. "Put it down," Jack advised. "You're making a mistake you can't take back." The bartender hesitated, then slowly lowered the weapon. Self-preservation, overriding loyalty. "Call Sheriff Davis," Jack instructed. "Tell him to meet us at the station. Tell him the Iron Serpents are coming in to make full confessions about certain activities in Pinewood Creek." The bartender looked to Malone for confirmation, a habit so ingrained he didn't even realize he was doing it. "Do it," Malone muttered, defeat evident in his slumped shoulders. As the bartender retreated, Jack addressed the room. "Anyone who can walk, help those who can't. We're all going for a little drive." Jack maintained his vigilance as the Iron Serpents gradually regained their feet, supporting injured comrades. There was no conversation, no banter, no threats. The atmosphere had transformed from aggressive confidence to subdued compliance. Outside the Rattlesnake Bar, a light desert rain had begun to fall, washing away the day's dust. By morning, it would cleanse the town of more than just dirt. Jack's truck became an impromptu prisoner transport, with Malone and Dobson secured in the back seat. The others followed in Twitch Reynolds' van, a temporary convoy of the defeated. As they drove toward the sheriff's office, Malone stared out the window at the rain-slicked streets of the town he'd terrorized for years. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know exactly what I'm doing," Jack replied, eyes on the road. "I'm showing my daughter that monsters can be defeated." The Iron Serpent's reign of terror was about to end, not with a gunfight or a dramatic last stand, but with a long overdue visit to the sheriff's office and a stack of signed confessions. And as Jack Carter escorted the subdued gang across town, he knew this wasn't the end of his battle. It was just the beginning of Pinewood Creek's healing. The sheriff's office was a small, single-story building of sandstone and adobe, its windows casting yellow rectangles of light onto the wet pavement. When Jack pulled up with his unlikely cargo, Sheriff Davis was waiting on the porch, his weathered face a mask of conflicting emotions: anger, fear, and something that might have been shame. "What the hell is this, Carter?" he demanded as Jack escorted Malone from the truck. "Justice," Jack replied simply. "Something that's been missing around here for a while." The look that passed between the sheriff and Malone spoke volumes. A history of corrupt arrangements and mutual benefit suddenly jeopardized. "These men want to confess to their crimes," Jack continued, his voice carrying in the night air. "And I'm going to stay right here while they do it." A small crowd had begun to gather, so night owls and insomniacs drawn by the unusual procession. They stood at a cautious distance, whispering among themselves, witnessing something many had thought impossible. As Jack guided the Iron Serpents into the station, he felt a strange sense of symmetry. This morning he had stood in a hospital room watching his daughter fight for recovery. Tonight he stood in the heart of corruption, watching a town's first chance at renewal. Two battles, two vigils, the same purpose. By dawn, the rain had stopped. 8 written confessions sat on Sheriff Davis's desk. And something had changed in Pinewood Creek. Something subtle but profound. Fear had broken its stranglehold. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes passing in the hallway. Jack sat beside Lily's bed, his large hand gently holding her small one. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw after 2 days without shaving, but his clothes were fresh. Martha had brought him a clean change after hearing what happened at the Rattlesnake. The fluorescent lights had been dimmed at Jack's request, creating a softer ambiance in the sterile room. He'd also brought in a small stuffed dolphin from home, Lily's favorite, and placed it beside her on the pillow. Little touches of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. Throughout the night, Jack had maintained his vigil, dozing occasionally but never fully sleeping. His body was accustomed to functioning on minimal rest from countless missions and deployments. But this watch was different, more important than any he'd kept before. The sun was just beginning to filter through the blinds, casting thin golden stripes across the hospital bed. Jack watched as the light slowly moved across Lily's face, highlighting the smattering of freckles across her nose that reminded him so much of her mother. Claire had been gone for 5 years now, cancer taking her quickly and mercilessly, but these small genetic echoes kept her memory alive in their daughter. "You should have seen her, Claire," Jack whispered, continuing a conversation he'd maintained silently with his late wife over the years. "She tried to protect those flowers, stood right up to them. She has your courage." Talking to Claire had become a habit during difficult moments, a way of processing, of connecting past to present. He didn't believe she could hear him exactly, but the ritual provided comfort nonetheless. Dr. Patel had reduced Lily's sedation early that morning. She'll wake up when she's ready, she had assured Jack. The brain has its own timetable for healing. Jack studied the monitors, having familiarized himself with the readings overnight. Heart rate, strong and steady. Blood pressure, normal for her age. Oxygen saturation, excellent. All positive signs, but they couldn't tell him what he most wanted to know. Would his little girl still be herself when she opened her eyes? The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about Lily's prognosis. The CT scan showed minimal swelling. The injury was classified as a moderate concussion, serious but not catastrophic. Still, with brain injuries, certainty was impossible until consciousness returned. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Garcia entered, carrying a tray with coffee and what looked like homemade muffins. "I thought you might need this," she said, setting the tray on the side table. "It's going to be a long day." Jack nodded gratefully. "Any news from town?" Sarah's expression changed, a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It's all anyone's talking about. The Iron Serpent's confessing. Sheriff Davis under investigation. State troopers arrived at dawn." She lowered her voice, although they were alone. "They're saying you took down 8 armed men single-handedly." Jack didn't respond. The details of what happened at the Rattlesnake weren't important. Only the outcome mattered. "The mayor called an emergency town council meeting for noon," Sarah continued. "There's talk of appointing an interim sheriff." She hesitated, then added, "Your name came up." Jack shook his head. "I'm not looking for a job. I just wanted my daughter to be safe." "It might not be that simple anymore, Jack." Sarah's voice was gentle but insistent. "What you did, it's changed things. People are talking about standing up to the protection rackets, about reopening businesses that were forced to close. You've given them hope." Jack hadn't left the room since returning from the sheriff's office. The department was in upheaval after the Iron Serpent's confessions implicated Sheriff Davis in a protection racket that stretched back years. State police had arrived to take over the investigation, and reporters from Phoenix were already descending on the previously overlooked town. None of that mattered to Jack. Only the small hand in his and the flutter of eyelids he'd been watching for any sign of movement. "I got your flowers back, lily pad," he said softly, continuing the one-sided conversation he'd maintained for hours. "Mrs. Hoffman saved some and we'll grow more. I thought maybe we could build a better stand together. Something sturdier." He gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead, careful to avoid the bandaged area. "The doctor says you're doing great, just taking your time waking up. That's okay. Daddy's not going anywhere." Sarah watched this tender moment silently before speaking again. "Jack, there's something else you should know. The state police found weapons in a storage unit registered to Malone. Military-grade stuff. They're saying it could be part of a much larger smuggling operation." This confirmed what Marcus's intelligence had suggested. The Iron Serpents were more than just local thugs. They were a node in a more sophisticated criminal network. "The FBI arrived an hour ago," Sarah continued. "They want to talk to you." Jack nodded, unsurprised. "They can wait." "Of course." Sarah squeezed his shoulder supportively before leaving. "I'll be in the waiting room if you need anything." Alone again with Lily, Jack resumed his quiet vigil. The events of the past 24 hours replayed in his mind. Martha's tearful explanation, the hospital admission, the intelligence gathering, the confrontation at the Rattlesnake, the confessions at the sheriff's office. It felt like a lifetime had passed since he'd driven into town, anticipating a joyful reunion with his daughter. Instead, he'd found himself thrust into a situation that called upon his most specialized skills. Not the ability to fight, but the ability to assess threats and neutralize them efficiently. The room door opened, and a new nurse entered, younger than the night staff, with a cheerful floral scrub top. "Good morning, Commander Carter. I'm Nurse Wilson, but everyone calls me Jenny." She checked Lily's vitals with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Patel will be making rounds soon. Your daughter's readings are looking very good." "Thank you," Jack replied, watching as she adjusted the IV drip. "You know," Jenny said conversationally, "my brother was in Afghanistan. Said the SEALs saved his unit once. Never knew who they were. Just shadows in the night," he said. "But he never forgot." Jack didn't respond directly. His service wasn't something he discussed casually, especially with strangers. The nurse seemed to understand his reticence. "Well, I just wanted to say thank you." For your service, then, and for what you did last night. She lowered her voice. My uncle owns the hardware store. The serpents broke his fingers when he couldn't pay. Maybe now he'll get some justice, too. After she left, Jack contemplated how quickly word had spread. Small towns had few secrets, and what had happened at the Rattlesnake was already becoming local legend, growing with each retelling, no doubt. The morning sun continued its slow journey across the hospital room, warming the antiseptic air. Jack maintained his vigil, occasionally reading aloud from Lily's favorite book that Sarah had brought from home, an adventure story about a girl who discovers a hidden world beneath her garden. Jack's mind kept circling back to the moment in the Rattlesnake when he'd had Victor Malone pinned against the wall. How easy it would have been to apply just a fraction more pressure. How tempting. The SEAL had been trained to compartmentalize, to separate mission from emotion. But the father in him had wanted revenge, not justice. In the end, it wasn't his training that stopped him. It was Lily's voice in his head, asking him once after he returned from a particularly difficult deployment, "Do you ever hurt bad people, Daddy?" He had chosen his words carefully then. Sometimes I have to stop people who are hurting others, but I never hurt anyone more than necessary to protect innocent people. Promise? She had asked, her green eyes solemn. I promise, he had answered. Jack had kept that promise at the Rattlesnake, though it hadn't been easy. The room door opened again, and Dr. Patel entered with a tablet in hand, reviewing Lily's latest readings. Excellent progress, she announced. Brain activity is increasing. She's processing external stimuli. Talk to her. She can likely hear you even if she can't respond yet. I've been talking to her all night, Jack admitted. Doctor, Patel smiled. That's perfect. Familiar voices are the best medicine. She performed a quick examination, checking Lily's pupils with a small pen light, testing reflexes with gentle efficiency. I'm reducing the sedation further, she explained. It could be minutes or hours before she wakes, but all the signs point to a good recovery. When she wakes up, Jack began, forming the question carefully, will she be herself, Dahar? Patel anticipated his concern. Most likely, yes. There may be some confusion initially, possibly short-term memory gaps around the incident. But children are remarkably resilient. After the doctor left, Jack felt a weight lift slightly from his shoulders. The medical prognosis was optimistic. The iron serpents were in custody. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, he allowed himself to truly believe that things might be okay. He reached for the coffee Sarah had brought, now lukewarm but still welcome. As he took a sip, a text message lit up his phone screen. Marcus again. Federal database hits on 3 of the serpents. Connections to arms dealers in Phoenix and Tucson. This goes deeper than we thought. Call me when you can. Jack set the phone aside. Whatever larger criminal network had been operating through the iron serpents, it was a problem for law enforcement now. His focus remained on the small figure in the hospital bed. You know what I was thinking, Lilypad, he said, resuming his one-sided conversation. When you're better, maybe we could take that trip to the Grand Canyon we've been talking about. See the sunrise from the south rim. They say the light makes the rocks look like they're on fire. Jack had missed so much of Lily's childhood due to deployments. Birthday parties attended via video call, school plays watched through grainy footage weeks after they happened, growth spurts documented through photographs rather than witnessed firsthand. His transition to reserve status 2 years ago had been motivated by the desire to be more present, to not miss any more milestones. I thought maybe after that we could visit the butterfly sanctuary in Scottsdale, he continued. The one you saw on that nature show, where they land right on your hands if you're patient enough. Jack fell silent, remembering Lily's fascination with butterflies, the transformation they underwent, the fragility of their wings, the astonishing journeys they made despite their delicate structure. She had once explained to him, with all the serious expertise of an 8-year-old, that butterflies remembered being caterpillars even after their metamorphosis. The continuity of self despite profound change. Would she remember everything after her own transformation? The doctors couldn't say for certain. A soft pressure against his fingers jolted Jack from his reverie. Lily's hand had tightened around his. Not a reflex or involuntary movement, a deliberate squeeze. Jack leaned forward, heart suddenly pounding. Lily, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered again, and this time they opened. Confusion, then recognition. Daddy? Her voice was barely a whisper, raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed the previous day. Jack's vision blurred. I'm here, Lilypad. Daddy's here. You came early. A small smile formed on her pale face. I heard my girl needed me. He stroked her hair gently, avoiding the bandaged area. Relief washed over Jack, so powerful it made his hands tremble slightly. The eyes looking back at him were clear and aware. His daughter was still there, still herself. Water? She asked hoarsely. Jack quickly brought a cup with a straw to her lips, supporting her head gently as she took small sips. Better? He asked. She nodded, then winced at the movement. My head hurts. I know 3 weeks later, the town square bustled with activity under a brilliant Arizona sky. Jack stood in the shade of a newly installed awning, watching as the transformation unfolded before him. Storefront windows that had been papered over for months now displayed fresh merchandise. The coffee shop that had closed after failing to meet the Iron Serpent's protection demands was reopening under new management, the scent of freshly ground beans wafting across the square. Even the fountain, where Lily had been injured, sparkled after a community cleanup effort, its waters dancing in the sunlight rather than standing stagnant. Most remarkable was the change in the townspeople themselves. Conversations were louder, laughter more frequent. Children played in open spaces that had previously been hurried through. Elderly couples sat on benches, enjoying the day without constantly scanning for approaching motorcycles. Recovery wasn't complete. There were still empty storefronts, still whispered conversations about the Iron Serpents and what might happen when they eventually returned from prison. Fear didn't disappear overnight, but the first steps had been taken. At the center of the square stood Lily's new flower stand. Built from oak instead of pine, with a metal awning that could withstand desert storms, it stood as a symbol of permanence and renewal. Solar-powered LED lights were strung across the top, ensuring it would remain visible even as evening approached. A small, discreet security camera, donated by the local electronics store, provided protection without being obvious. The stand had become more than just Lily's project. It represented something the town had been missing: resilience. Jack watched as Lily carefully arranged wildflowers on the polished wooden display. Her movements were more deliberate than before the injury, but each day brought improvement. The elastic headband she wore covered the healing wound on her scalp, decorated with artificial flowers that matched her real displays. What do you think, Daddy? Lily asked, stepping back to survey her handiwork. It's perfect, Jack said honestly. And it was. Not just the stand, but the moment. The air of possibility that now permeated the town he'd chosen for its quiet anonymity when retiring from active duty 3 years ago. A town he now realized he'd never fully joined until now. Watching his daughter arrange her flowers, Jack reflected on the whirlwind of the past 3 weeks. Lily's recovery had been remarkable, faster than the doctors expected, though not without challenges. There had been headaches, moments of dizziness, one frightening night of confusion that sent them rushing back to the emergency room, only to be reassured it was a normal part of healing. Through it all, the community had rallied around them in ways Jack hadn't anticipated. Meals appeared on their doorstep daily. Neighbors took turns mowing their lawn and tending Lily's garden. Sarah Garcia drove Lily to her follow-up appointments when Jack needed to meet with federal investigators. The case against the Iron Serpents had expanded dramatically. What began as local charges of assault and extortion had grown to include weapons trafficking, money laundering, and corruption. Sheriff Davis was facing criminal charges of his own, along with 2 deputies and a county commissioner. The interim sheriff, a no-nonsense state trooper named Ramirez, approached them with his hat in his hands, nodding respectfully to Jack before smiling at Lily. Commander Carter, he nodded respectfully, then smiled at Lily. Miss Carter, those flowers look mighty fine. Thank you, Sheriff, Lily beamed. Do you want to buy some? They're for the sick children. I'd be honored. He selected a bunch of desert marigolds and handed Lily a $20 bill. No change needed. Lily's face lit up as she carefully added the bill to her donation jar, a new one with a secure lock, bolted to the stand to prevent theft. The previous day's donations were already substantial, the jar nearly full. People had been extraordinarily generous, many paying far more than the suggested price for Lily's flowers. As Lily carefully recorded the sale in her notebook, part of the cognitive exercises the neurologist had recommended, Ramirez turned to Jack. I wanted you to know the state prosecutor is moving forward with charges against Davis and the entire Iron Serpent leadership. Your testimony was persuasive, Jack nodded. The prosecutor had been initially skeptical about a former SEAL who somehow subdued 8 armed men without causing serious injury, until she reviewed the bar's security footage. What about the federal connections? Jack asked quietly, mindful of Lily nearby. Ongoing investigation, but promising. Turns out, Malone's operation was more sophisticated than anyone realized. The weapons trafficking angle especially has federal agencies interested. Jack had suspected as much. Small-town bullies rarely operated with the level of impunity the Iron Serpents had enjoyed, without connections to bigger fish. There's something else, Ramirez continued, his expression turning more formal. The town council is meeting tomorrow to discuss appointing a permanent sheriff. Your name came up. Jack raised an eyebrow. I'm not a law enforcement officer. Military police experience, special operations background. And you've already demonstrated a commitment to this community that goes beyond a badge. Ramirez shrugged. Just something to think about. As the interim sheriff walked away, Jack considered the offer. 3 weeks ago, the idea would have been unthinkable. His plan had been simple. Finish his military career, raise his daughter in quiet anonymity, perhaps do some private security consulting to stay sharp. Law enforcement hadn't been on his radar. But something had changed during those tense hours at the Rattlesnake Bar. A connection had been formed, not just with Lily, who had always been his center, but with this place and these people. Daddy, can I go talk to Ms. Hoffman? She's by the fountain. Lily pointed to the elderly woman who had been her first customer ever. Sure, Lilypad. Stay where I can see you. Lily moved carefully toward the fountain, her gait still slightly hesitant but improving daily. Jack watched her go, pride and protectiveness swelling in equal measure. Sarah Garcia approached with a glass of lemonade, condensation beating on its surface in the heat. The town hero and his flower girl, she smiled. You two are becoming local celebrities. Jack winced at the hero label. I'm just her dad. You're more than that now, whether you like it or not. Sarah handed him the lemonade. People need symbols, Jack, especially after living under fear for so long. You've given them that. Jack watched as Lily chatted animatedly with Mrs. Hoffman, gesturing toward the newsstand with obvious pride. Mr. Rodriguez says I can put flowers on the tables in his restaurant, Lily informed Sarah proudly when she rejoined them. And Ms. Taylor at the library wants to buy some every week. Sounds like business is booming, Sarah replied, then lowered her voice to add to Jack. The hospital board approved a special recognition for Lily's fundraising at next month's gala. They want her to cut the ribbon for the new pediatric wing. Jack watched his daughter resuming her work at the stand, arranging blooms with serious concentration. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. The nightmares that plagued her first week home had grown less frequent. Children were resilient, the doctors had reminded him, more resilient sometimes than adults. Observing the town square in its renewal, Jack couldn't help but see parallels to his military experience. He'd participated in post-conflict reconstruction efforts abroad, witnessing how communities could rebuild after trauma. The same principles applied here. Security first, then infrastructure, then the gradual return of normal social interactions. The difference was that here, he wasn't just a temporary presence waiting for deployment orders. Here, he could see the process through. Have you thought about what's next? Sarah asked. Now that your retirement paperwork is processing? Jack had been asking himself the same question. For 16 years, his identity had been defined by his service, his role clear, his purpose unquestioned. Civilian life offered fewer certainties. Lily needs stability, he said finally. In this town, it's recovering, but the wounds run deep. People trusted the wrong leaders for too long. That takes time to heal. So you're staying? Sarah made it a statement rather than a question. Jack nodded. We're staying. The decision, once voiced, felt right. This place that had been merely a convenient location for a single father to raise his daughter while completing his military service had become something more. A community, perhaps even a home. Across the square, Lily waved excitedly. A group of her classmates had arrived, eager to see her back in action. Her teacher stood nearby, smiling encouragingly. Daddy! Can I show my friends the special drawer you made for the flowers? Lily called. Of course, Jack replied. Just be careful with the latch. As Lily proudly demonstrated the stand's features to her impressed audience, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with uniforms or missions. The drawer she was showing off was more than just storage. Jack had built it with a false bottom, a place where Lily could keep her most precious mementos safe. including the photograph of him in uniform that had been trampled during the attack. He designed it based on principles learned creating field caches during operations, repurposed for a little girl's peace of mind. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. You know, the sheriff position isn't the only opening in town. The high school needs a new security director and physical education teacher, someone who understands discipline and teamwork. Jack raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting I become a gym teacher? I'm suggesting you have options, Sarah replied, and skills this town needs. Before Jack could respond, a commotion at the edge of the square caught his attention. A group of motorcycles had pulled up. Not iron serpents, but riders in leather vests emblazoned with American flags and military insignia. Veterans Riding Club, Sarah explained, following his gaze. They heard about what happened. Been showing up regularly to make sure everyone feels safe. There were a dozen of them, men and women of varying ages, their bikes gleaming in the afternoon sun. Unlike the iron serpents, who had used their machines to intimidate, these riders had a different presence. Watchful but not threatening, a protective perimeter. One rider, a gray-haired man with a Desert Storm patch, approached Jack and offered his hand. Commander Carter? Name's Mike Reynolds, Marine Corps, retired. We wanted to pay our respects. What you did here, well, it matters. To all of us who served. Jack shook the offered hand, recognizing the unspoken brotherhood that transcended branches of service. Just did what needed doing, he replied, echoing his earlier words to Sarah. Reynolds nodded, understanding the understatement. We were thinking, if you and your daughter don't mind, we'd like to organize a benefit ride. Raise some additional funds for those sick kids she's helping. The proposal surprised Jack. A benefit ride? 50 miles round trip to Lake Powell and back. We've got chapters in 3 counties. Could probably get 100 bikes, easy. Reynolds grinned. Nothing changes perception like seeing 100 veterans supporting a little girl's flower stand instead of a gang terrorizing it. The symbolism wasn't lost on Jack. Motorcycles, once a symbol of fear in Pinewood Creek, reclaimed as something positive. We provide full security, of course, Reynolds continued, and coordinate with local businesses for sponsorship. Could make a real difference for that hospital fund. Jack glanced at Lily, surrounded by friends and community, her face alight with joy as she sold another bouquet. I think she'd like that very much, he said. Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder. Excellent. We'll start planning. And Carter, if you ever want to ride with us, there's always an open spot. As the Veterans Riding Club dispersed around the square, greeting townspeople and deliberately patronizing local businesses, Jack observed how differently they were received compared to the Iron Serpents. Same motorcycles, different energy. The town was learning to distinguish between power that threatened and power that protected. The psychology of recovery at work. A small tugging at his sleeve interrupted his thoughts. Lily stood beside him, her donation jar clutched carefully in both hands. Daddy, it's almost full. Can we count it? After we close up for the day, he promised. I think today might be your biggest donation yet. Her face shone with pride. Do you think the hospital will be able to buy an extra medicine machine with this? I think they'll be able to help a lot of children, Jack assured her, touched by her unwavering focus on others despite her own trauma. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square, a gentle breeze carried the scent of Lily's flowers throughout the area. Customers continued to arrive, families, couples, individuals, all making a point to visit the stand that had become a symbol of the town's renewal. Jack watched as his daughter handled each transaction with care, thanking people not just for buying flowers but for helping sick children. Her recovery wasn't complete. The neurologist had warned there might be subtle effects for months, but her essential nature remained unchanged. If anything, the experience had deepened her compassion. Standing slightly apart from the activity, Jack reflected on the chain of events that had brought them here. A moment of cruelty that could have ended in tragedy had instead sparked transformation. For Lily, for the town, for him. He thought of his years in special operations, of missions where success and failure were measured and objectives accomplished, threats neutralized, assets secured, quantifiable outcomes with clear parameters. This was messier, more complex. The Iron Serpents were gone, but the conditions that allowed them to flourish, isolation, complacency, the fragility of small-town economics, remained challenges to be addressed. True security wouldn't come from removing one threat, but from building a community resilient enough to prevent the next one from taking root. For the first time since Claire's death, Jack felt something like purpose extending beyond his immediate responsibility to Lily. A way to use the skills he'd developed over 16 years of service in a context that directly benefited his daughter and their community. Whether that meant becoming sheriff, teaching at the high school, or finding some other role, the specifics mattered less than the commitment. Pinewood Creek needed people willing to invest in its future, to rebuild not just businesses and institutions, but trust. As evening approached, Lily began preparing to close the stand. Jack watched her methodical process, organizing remaining flowers, carefully counting the money in the donation jar, wiping down surfaces with the antibacterial wipes the doctor had recommended as part of her concussion recovery protocol. $217, Daddy, she announced proudly, eyes wide. That's more than I've ever made in one day. That's incredible, Lilypad, Jack said, genuinely impressed. The hospital will be so grateful. Can we take it there tomorrow? She carefully placed the money in the special lockbox Jack had created for her earnings. First thing in the morning, he promised. As they packed up the last of the supplies, Martha Jenkins approached with a covered dish. Lasagna, she announced without preamble. For dinner. You two have been out here all day. Thank you, Martha, Jack said, accepting the dish gratefully. Cooking had never been his strong suit, and the community's meal train had been a blessing during Lily's recovery. It's nothing, Martha waved away his thanks. Just wanted to tell you, town council meeting went well. They've asked state officials to conduct a full audit of the sheriff's department. Good, Jack nodded. Accountability would be essential in rebuilding trust in local institutions. And Martha continued with a meaningful look. They'll be formally requesting applications for the permanent sheriff position next week. Just so you know, before Jack could respond, Mr. Rodriguez approached, his restaurant keys jingling in his hand. The man had reopened his establishment just a week after the Iron Serpent's arrest, defiantly replacing the front window they had smashed months earlier. Commander Carter, he greeted Jack warmly. Miss Lily, I was hoping to catch you before you left. My first weekend back in business was a success, and I wanted to share the bounty. He handed Lily an envelope. For the hospital fund, my customers were very generous when they heard about your flowers. Lily opened the envelope and eyes widening at the check inside. $300. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. My pleasure, Pequeña Guerrera, he replied, using the nickname that had spread through the Hispanic community, Little Warrior. You inspire us all. As Mr. Rodriguez returned to his restaurant, Jack observed how naturally Lily accepted the community's support. There was no self-consciousness, no sense that she was receiving charity. In her mind, she was simply part of something larger, a network of people helping other people. Time to head home, Lilypad, Jack said, helping her gather the last of her things. You've had a big day. The walk home took them past the library, recently liberated from the Serpent's protection racket. The librarian, Mrs. Taylor, waved from the steps where she was organizing books for an outdoor reading event. Lily, Jack, I've set aside those gardening books you asked about, she called, and the special one about desert flowers. Can we get them now, Daddy? Lily asked eagerly. Tomorrow, Jack promised. It's been a long day, and you need rest. Lily didn't argue, a sign she was more tired than she was letting on. The neurologist had warned that fatigue would be an ongoing challenge during recovery, energy levels unpredictable for several months. Their home was a modest, ranch-style house on a quiet street 3 blocks from the town square. Jack had chosen it for its strategic advantages when they first moved to Pinewood Creek. Corner lot with good sight lines, multiple exit routes, defensible perimeter. The habits of operational security didn't fade easily. Now those same features served a different purpose. They made it easier for him to ensure Lily's safety during her recovery. The open floor plan meant he could monitor her from the kitchen while preparing meals. The fenced backyard provided a secure space for her to get fresh air when crowds became overwhelming. As they approached, Jack noticed something new, a small garden statue placed near their front walkway. A stone angel, wings spread protectively, face serene. Look, Daddy, Lily exclaimed, immediately drawn to it. It's so pretty. Jack examined the unexpected addition, finding a small card attached to the base. The message was simple, watching over Pinewood Creek's angels. Thank you both. There was no signature, just a small drawing of a rattlesnake with a line struck through it. Lily ran her fingers over the stone wings. Can we keep it, Daddy? Of course, Jack agreed, touched by the anonymous gesture. Inside, while Lily washed up for dinner, Jack's phone rang, the secure line he maintained for military contacts. Marcus Winter's number flashed on the screen. Carter, he answered. Jack, Marcus's voice was businesslike as always. Thought you'd want to know. The FBI task force made 3 more arrests today connected to the Iron Serpents case. Arms dealers in Phoenix with cartel connections. Good, Jack said simply. They're calling it Operation Desert Flower internally, Marcus continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. Seems your daughter's stand has become something of a symbol. She'd be proud, Jack replied, watching through the window as Lily carefully arranged her dried flower collection on the porch swing. Anything else I should know? Just that you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest. This weapons trafficking network appears to extend into 3 states. The Iron Serpents were just one distribution node. Will they come looking for payback? Jack asked, the question that had lingered in the back of his mind since that night at the Rattlesnake. Unlikely, Marcus assessed. The operation's too compromised now, too much heat. Standard procedure would be to cut losses and rebuild elsewhere. Keep me posted if that assessment changes, Jack said. Will do. And Jack? The unit sends their regards. Word spread about what you did. After hanging up, Jack reheated Martha's lasagna and set the table. As they ate dinner, Lily chattered about her plans for expanding the flower stand selection, her words occasionally running together as fatigue set in. And maybe we could get some of those special desert roses that Mrs. Taylor showed me in the book, and maybe some of the blue ones that only grow in the mountains, and maybe, she yawned hugely. Maybe it's bedtime, Jack suggested gently. But I'm not tired, Lily protested, even as her eyelids drooped. Tell you what, Jack compromised. 1 chapter of your book, then sleep. This was acceptable, and soon Lily was tucked into bed, listening as Jack read from the adventure novel she'd selected from her bookshelf. It was a familiar ritual, one that had sustained them through deployments, via recorded videos, and Claire's illness, in hospital rooms, and now recovery. Daddy? Lily asked drowsily as he finished the chapter. Are we going to stay here now? Forever? Jack considered the question. Would you like that? Lily nodded, eyes already closing. I like it here. People are nice, and they need us. Need us? Jack echoed, curious about her perception. Lily murmured, drifting toward sleep. They need you to protect them, and they need me to show them that scary things don't win. The simple wisdom of her observation struck Jack deeply. From the mouth of a child, the essence of community crystallized. Mutual need, mutual support, mutual growth. Then we'll stay, he promised, kissing her forehead. After Lily fell asleep, Jack moved to the front porch with a cup of coffee. The desert night had settled in, stars emerging in a sky untainted by city lights. From his position, he could see most of the street, old habits of perimeter awareness never fully dormant. But tonight, the vigilance felt different. Less like waiting for threats and more like watching over something valuable, something worth protecting. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Town council wants to meet with you tomorrow at 2. Formal invitation to discuss community security initiatives. Translation, they want to offer you the sheriff job. Jack set the phone aside without responding immediately. The position would be challenging, rebuilding a department tainted by corruption, establishing new community trust, navigating the politics of small-town governance. It wasn't the quiet retirement he had envisioned when transitioning to reserve status. But then, nothing about the past 3 weeks had gone according to plan. He thought about Lily's words, they need you to protect them. Was that true? Or was it simpler? Did they just need someone willing to stand up when standing up was difficult? The Veterans Riding Club rumbled past on patrol, headlights cutting through the darkness, a deliberate show of presence meant to reassure residents. One rider raised a hand in acknowledgement as they passed Jack's house. He returned the gesture, recognizing the universal signal between those who had served. I see you. I acknowledge you. We stand together. As the sound of motorcycles faded into the distance, Jack made his decision. He would meet with the town council. He would consider their offer. Not because he wanted to be sheriff, but because Pinewood Creek deserved someone who understood both the mechanics of security and the human cost of its absence. The following morning dawned clear and bright. Jack woke to find Lily already up, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by her flower guidebooks, making elaborate plans for spring planting. Morning, Daddy, she greeted him cheerfully. I figured out what we need for the butterfly garden. Can we go to the nursery this weekend? Let's see how you're feeling, Jack hedged, mindful of the doctor's warnings about overexertion. Maybe we can start with a list and some sketches. Lily accepted this compromise readily, returning to her planning with the focus that had always characterized her projects. Jack marveled at her resilience. 3 weeks ago, she had been in a hospital bed. Today, she was plotting a butterfly sanctuary as if nothing had happened. After breakfast, they walked to the town square together, Lily carrying her donation lockbox carefully. The morning was quiet, most businesses just beginning to open, but already there was a different energy than before the Iron Serpent's arrest. Shopkeepers stood in doorways, greeting passersby. A maintenance worker whistled as he repainted a bench. Two elderly men played chess at a table near the fountain. The hospital was a 10-minute walk beyond the square. As they approached the modern building, a regional medical center that serves several small towns in the area, Lily's excitement grew. Do you think they'll let me see the children? I want to tell them more about the flowers. Maybe another day, Jack suggested. Today's just a delivery day. The hospital administrator, Miss Patel, Dr. Patel's sister-in-law in the way of small towns, greeted them warmly in the lobby. Lily, Commander Carter, what a wonderful surprise. Lily proudly presented her donation. $517 for the sick children. Patel made an appropriate fuss, insisting on counting the money with Lily and providing an official receipt. This will help buy books and games for our pediatric patients, she explained. Things that make their stay more comfortable. As Lily basked in the acknowledgement, Jack noticed several staff members watching from the nurses' station smiling. Lily's story had clearly spread throughout the hospital. Mrs. Patel lowered her voice to speak with Jack while Lily examined a thank you poster made by previous patients. The hospital board is very impressed with her fundraising efforts, she said. We'd like to do something special to recognize her contribution. Perhaps naming the new reading nook in the pediatric wing after her? Lily's garden has a nice ring to it. She'd be honored, Jack replied, knowing how much the recognition would mean to his daughter. Excellent. And Commander Miss Patel added with a knowing look, I understand congratulations might soon be in order. My husband plays golf with Councilman Wilson, who mentioned you're being considered for a rather important position. News traveled fast in Pinewood Creek. Jack offered a non-committal smile. Nothing's been decided. After leaving the hospital, they walked back toward the town square. Lily was quiet, seemingly lost in thought. Everything okay, Lily Pad? Jack asked. I was just thinking, she said slowly, about the bad men, the ones who broke my stand. Jack tensed. Lily had spoken little about the attack since waking in the hospital, and the child psychologist had advised letting her process at her own pace. What about them? He asked carefully. Do you think they're sorry? For what they did? The question caught Jack off guard. In his experience, men like the Iron Serpents rarely experience genuine remorse. Their confessions had been tactical, not moral, a calculation of relative consequences. But how to explain this to a 10-year-old whose worldview centered on basic fairness and the possibility of redemption? I think, he said slowly, that sometimes people do bad things because they've forgotten how to do good things. And sometimes it takes serious consequences to make them remember. Lily considered this. Like a timeout, but for grown-ups? Something like that, Jack agreed, grateful for her simple analogy. I hope they remember how to be good, she said finally. It's better when people are nice to each other. Her uncomplicated moral clarity struck Jack deeply. In a world of operational complexities and strategic calculations, his daughter's perspective cut through to the essence. It's better when people are nice to each other. As they approached the town square, they found it busier than the previous day. Word had spread about Lily's return, and it seemed many residents had made a point of visiting the flower stand. A small line had already formed, although the stand wasn't yet open. Look, Daddy, Lily exclaimed, pointing to something new beside her stand. Someone had placed a handmade sign, Pinewood Creek's bravest florist, open 10-4. The gesture brought tears to Jack's eyes, quickly blinked away before Lily could notice. This town, which had once stood by in silence while the Iron Serpents terrorized its residents, was finding its voice again, starting with support for one small girl who had dared to stand her ground. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square, Jack realized that the chain of events set in motion by one act of cruelty had culminated in something unexpected, not just justice, but renewal. For his daughter, for this town, and perhaps, most surprisingly, for himself. The coming months would bring challenges. Lily's ongoing recovery, the rebuilding of local institutions, his own transition to civilian life. But for the first time since Claire's death, Jack felt something beyond the focused determination that had propelled him through grief and single parenthood. He felt hope. Not the naive optimism that ignores reality, but the hard-won hope of someone who has seen the worst and still believes in the possibility of better. The kind of hope that sustains not just through crisis, but through the long, patient work of rebuilding. As Lily welcomed her first customers of the day, her smile brighter than the Arizona sun, Jack took his place beside the flower stand. Not as Commander Carter, decorated Navy SEAL with a spotless record, but simply as a father. A father who had shown his daughter, and perhaps an entire town, the difference between those who use fear to appear strong and those who are truly strong, strong enough to choose protection over destruction, community over isolation, and mercy over vengeance. In Pinewood Creek, the flowers were blooming again, and this time they would be protected.